Hello, welcome to Radical Engagements here at Varn Blog, and we're taking a trip back in time to the Haiti days of 2019, when I believe he was still one of the editors-in-chief at Viewpoint Mag back in the time. And I don't know if Viewpoint Mag's still publishing. The last articles I've seen from them seem to be from 2023. But they were an up-and-coming leftist mag back in the late teens, and Asad Haider had recently written a book on identity, which I covered way back on Symptomatic Redness podcast with Amok Sahu when the book was new. I believe that would have been around 2017, 18, somewhere in there. But anyway, we're covering today on depoliticization because I think we are living through a depoliticized moment where politics that do exist are getting weird, but they're less connected to anything you can actually do politically, and thus divorced from not just community, but in some ways reality. Because when you don't need to believe things that have any community basis or any material basis, you can believe whatever the fuck you want. All right. Let's get into it. On depoliticization from December 16th, 2019, about 6 years ago, we see Raising the Banner by Georgy Khrushchev from 1960, which, for those of you who are watching, involves a kind of impressionistically painted man picking up a red flag, looking like he's picking up from dead hands on cobblestone streets with other bodies running through tracks over a grate. All right. Let's get into the actual article, shall we? Our global situation is one characterized by the increasing politicization of social movements. Yeah, the social movements part definitely isn't still being politicized in the same way. Ironically, the victory of Biden and a lot of other global situations have liquidated a lot of those movements into the Democratic Party and now into pretty much depolitical groups, as well as weird sectarian groupings and belief sects. A flood of young people towards politics and a sharpening awareness of the traps of political institutions within the status quo. Oh, if only that had been true. Asad Haider, I think there was a lot of awareness, and then it was all abandoned opportunistically almost immediately. But anyway, my claim then will seem somewhat paradoxical. I propose that our situation should be understood not only in terms of resurgent radical politics, but also with attention to the perniciousness of its opposite, the frame of depoliticization. I would go so far to say a lot of radical politics ended up being a form of depoliticization by stealth mode. But we'll come back to that. This is Haider now. What is depoliticization, and what is the effect of depoliticization on the growth of movements and organization? How can tendencies of depoliticization be combated? I mean, it's what happened to the New Communist movement after the New Left. It's what happened to the New Left after the 1960s and early 70s. It's happened in cycles about every generation and a half since the 1940s. So you have 4 generational cycles of politicization and depoliticization. Even Gen X, which probably had the least politicization, has also seen massive depoliticization and then repoliticization, but on a conservative ground. Let's go back here. Depoliticization has its global and historical condition, the failure of the 20th century revolutions, and the closure of the revolutionary form of the party and the post-revolutionary form of the Socialist Party state, aka the USSR. There are also a lot of local and contemporary conditions to which we will return. Let's be clear about the successes of these revolutions: the overthrow of the old regimes, the expulsion of the imperialists, and the initiation of the international revolutionary process. As Alain Badiou puts it, everyone's favorite weird French old Maoist, who's a red Platonist, the revolutions will be driven by a communist hypothesis, whatever that exactly means, which says the existing world is not necessary. It is not necessary for human life to be subordinated by the state and the market. Okay, sure. Because the state and the market work intertwined here. Nevertheless, none of these revolutions managed to proceed through the transition to another kind of society. Socialist construction did not yield communism. Yeah, I mean, maybe it will yield it eventually, but it hasn't yet. And the societies that are actually existing socialist don't claim it either. They're claimed to be building towards it, but they haven't claimed to have achieved it or even gotten close. So let's not go there, shall we? Unfortunately, most of the attempts to deal with the history of failure are various forms of denial. Listeners, quit doing this shit. It doesn't help you. You don't win by denying that you lost when you already had your leg chopped off. Anyway, there is a standard liberal view that says any attempt to change the world will end in disaster, and therefore the project of socialism was doomed from the beginning. Although it's weird that that became a liberal view, because the liberal view was also emerged from such a radical change in the European and post-European world that completely almost erased the prior one, particularly by the end of World War II. But of course they would do that because, they're now at stake. And this essentially is repeated in certain purist leftist views, which criticize the social experiments from the vantage points of an imaginary world, or one in which someone else was in charge and made better decisions, or a world in which revolution happened in some other country in some other way. What you getting at, Haider? I mean, this is fair enough that we have to deal with the world as we had it, and positing some hypothetical alternative won't really help you. Sure, and true enough, but what's the point? But we can't rewrite history as we pick and choose. We have to confront history as it happened. Thank you. But how are you going to do that? We have to be able to simultaneously understand the great revolutions of the 20th century were major events in human history which fundamentally changed what was possible, and the efforts to follow through and the consequences of these revolutions ended in failure. In the most part, anyway. That's me adding that. Some goals were achieved, but most of them weren't. Politics exist in a particular sequence which have a beginning and an end. They end when the existing procedure in names of politics has been exhausted. There are two dangers in this moment. Or this is really abstract, Haider. Let's get to a concrete point. I mean, this is true, but you have a goal and you reach it or you don't. But yeah, first, if the end of the political sequence is understood to be an indication of the futility and corruption of the whole project of emancipation, which means various forms of betrayal. Okay, define your terms more specifically. This is very vague. And so vague that I can make it mean a lot of different things. Second, if there is an insistence on continuing the modes of politics specific to a historical situation that no longer exists, which reduces politics to pure nostalgia and wish fulfillment. This we see a lot of. I know what this is referring to, and we see a ton of it. A lot of sectarian politics, regardless of whether or not it's left or right, is actually nostalgia that can't be brought about and isn't really aimed to. It's actually a backdoor form of depoliticization. You feel like you're advocating politics, but you're really not. Your politics aren't possible. At least not in the current context. And that goes from whether or not you want to bring back, protracted People's War with peasants and the Industrial Corps, which makes no sense, or whether or not you want to bring back the Habsburg emperors and are having conferences about it somewhere in Texas, which was a real thing. This isn't really politics, it's a projection and a hobby. We describe these as various forms of depoliticization. So depoliticization can look like politics, and I think Haider's right about this. The historical frame of depoliticization is not a period which the expression is the expression of the overall historical progression, right? Clearer. It is rather the consequence of the beginning and an end of specific purposes, and both the beginning and the end of the contingent phenomena. This is okay. I agree with what Haider's getting at here, but this is phrased in such an abstract way that it almost doesn't say anything. The historical frame of depoliticization is not a period which is the expression of the overall historical progression. Progressive towards what? And what, like, historical progression has to be limited by a goal. Otherwise, you have some abstract teleology that is basically functioning as an eschatology or as a revealing of things in the future in the mind of God. It doesn't really mean anything. It's a projection. It is rather the consequences of the beginning and end of a specific process. Okay, but which specific process? Can we get to that specific process? And both the beginning and the end are contingent phenomena. Contingent upon what? All right. Man, I wish people were required to go through this abstract thinking, but actually made to actually like limit and delimit their terms properly. Anyway, we must emphasize this reality if we are to see depoliticization as something that can be overcome. What reality? Because I don't know what your limit is. The end of the revolutionary, I guess, revolution, but revolution for what? I mean, the assumed thing is revolution towards communism, but there's all kinds of revolutions. Was not preordained, but the result of action, accidents, and circumstances. Okay, so stuff happens because stuff happens. Let's go into that more. Within the historical frame of depoliticization, the communist hypothesis has dropped out of view. So we're no longer aiming for communism. Okay. Even among socialists. So we drop communism as a goal and make all kinds of substitutions for it. I think we're living in a moment like that where people just deny that what communists historically wanted is possible and redefine what communism is only anti-imperialism or only market reforms or only when the government does stuff for you. Fair enough, but I'm having to read that into this. It's not actually stated. Many contemporary socialists believe this world is necessary. What is this world? I'm going to sound like a child or a teenager here, but it's because I'm getting frustrated by the level of abstraction this is written in. Okay. It isn't, it's saying such broad things that are said generally with confidence without you knowing what they actually mean. And so we have to go back and delimit them. I think I understand what Haider's getting at here, and I think I even agree with it, but this way of phrasing it is very obtuse. A powerful contemporary socialist opinion declares that the state and the market are necessary and that human life can't be achieved beyond them. Well, I mean, Domenico Lacerdo basically says this, so this has become more common. This is the most serious question for socialists today. It is not a debate around reformism. Under our current political constraints, it's very difficult to define. Yeah, reformism doesn't mean reform the way it meant in the early 20th century. It means usually policy changes. It's not even reforming institutions, it's just tweaking them. It is a position out of the necessity of existing reality. Okay, that's still very vague. Socialists debate questions of strategy which seem to bear on this question. Whether to participate in elections, whether to devote resources to community organizing, whether to form coalitions with other groups. Yeah, these are the big tactical and strategic considerations that come up all the time. These questions are specific to conjunctures. God damn it. Using scientific terms does not actually make you more scientific in and of itself. Right. These questions are specific to conjunctures, meetings of times and things, I guess, and their parameters are particularly unusual in the United States, where socialism has been especially weak. Okay, what's the there? The conjunctures are the questions. And why are the questions unusual in the United States? Or the parameters of the question are usual in the United States, where socialism has been especially weak. I mean, weak in what sense? I mean, it has been, but which sense are we talking about? This is why it is significant to a great many people have been introduced to the term socialist within the framework of recent bourgeois elections. There's nothing wrong with this in itself. It represents a step forward, maybe. I don't know that it actually did, but okay, maybe. But granted, it wasn't bad. The presence of socialists in elections has been the function of speaking through the window, as the German Social Democratic Party said. They have conveyed a message to the public in a space within the dominant ideology which has constrained politics. elections, has carrying politics to elections. At the same time, this is a local and contemporary condition of depoliticization. The politics are set by the state. Yeah, I mean, they are, as are the limits, as are the constitutions, et cetera, et cetera. The failure of the Democrats to prevent the crisis of their party with Trump's election has scrambled political expectations, which has now happened again in 2024, 2025. So, whatever. History repeats itself, but like dumber every time. They have responded by personalizing the enemy in the body of Trump, actually helping him as a figure of the demagoguery papering over the divisions within the right, which are already emerging in his pre-administration right now in 2025. See the debates between Musk and Steve Bannon happening in public, allowing them to absorb the stance of the opposition and thus circumscribe any other oppositional stance. To be a member of the resistance has for some time been a meaningless proposition. Yeah, that was true. Now, even the feign of resistance is given way to an opportunism which is craven as it is useless, aka everything is a fight against fascism, but somehow that's just to put Democrats in power who now can't really oppose fascists because they've put themselves in a situation that what they need to oppose fascists is do things that would be viewed as a threat to democracy, but they've already said that the whole situation is a threat to democracy. Do you see the catch-22 here? It remains to be seen whether dissent represented by Sanders will be able to continue withstanding the crushing institutional weight of this opportunism. Asterisk. It has now been seen. It was liquidated within a year and a half of this article being written. What is evident, especially in light of the recent electoral fate of the Labour Party in the UK, this is in 2019, people, not in 2024, where they came back, but as basically the Tories and have passed mostly Tory legislation. Anyway, is that the mass political organizing exhausts itself in a single campaign, socialism will be engaged in a grim struggle for survival during Trump's second term. But we didn't have Trump's second term then. We had Trump's second term 4 years later, and it's beginning now, which has really messed things up for a lot of people. Because they can't go back into the same modes that they were going to go back into because they've already disengaged them during the Biden administration. And the Biden administration normalized a ton of Trump's policies. So they can't really oppose them on the same grounds anymore either. See also how the Democrats totally gutted the anti-war movement in the odds. Some interpret this scenario as calling for greater radicalism and thus take a position beyond the socialist one, even using the word communist. Yeah, see the beginning of people calling themselves communists as a way to separate themselves out from socialists as a point of distinction. And this really began around 2019. But even the posture of greater radicalism does not necessarily mean maintaining the communist hypothesis, a belief that in building towards a classless, stateless society. In fact, a lot of people don't do that. Such declared views may still exist alongside a totally effective investment in the necessity of the existing world, which we see all the time today. I will identify 4 forms of effective investment, though there are many others. Now, okay, this is where Haider's being specific, and I actually like this section because I know what he's talking about. Alignment with factions defined in government at the highest bureaucratic level with prescribed political positions and actions, aka people who are going into union staffing and NGOs or try to be parts of the current administration or downstream from it. The formation of a political ideology and the basis of ad hoc opinions determined effectively, that is emotionally, on the basis of whom might hold these opinions are their opposites, rather than rationally, which subsumes any substantive political or strategic discussion. AKA, you're defined by your enemies. That's what Haider is getting to here. You're responding to your enemies and hold ad hoc positions in opposition to them, even if they make you incoherent. And oh my God, have we seen this for a long time in American political life? It's probably the most dominant form of incoherence that manifests today. The use of social media for the performance of political opinions, which is now dominating an entire generation, delivering internal matters of left organization to the media apparatus of the enemy. Do you really think you're going to foment things on capitalist platforms? I mean, really? And undermining the freedom of thought and discussion within these organizations, which did kind of happen, particularly by over relying on things that became heavily censored and even supporting the censorship when it was used against you. Yeah, all the leftists on Facebook. I will add, though, at the moment, it is not possible to develop this point that this performance of opinion operates at a speed which cannot be aligned with the processes required for political organization. Yeah, people change their opinions too damn fast for political organizations to actually form coherently from them, even if you can spread opinion very quickly through them. It's a very quick way to get people to engage in, in like 5-minute panics and 30-second hates and whatever else that might come up on Twitter and debates about nothing for 3 days. But it's not a good way to organize political parties because that requires more sustained effort. Right. Preoccupation with political and social identities. Oh my God, they just get worse in the past 10 years, which are effectively no different from one another. One may either be celebrated or condemned for a particular identity, which is obviously discernible when it is related to a socially ascribed categories like race or gender, but also at play when the contestation of political labels, which would not defer to any concrete political process, like terms like socialist or communist themselves, become little more than identities whose content is policed, not something that you actually can do and embody. That's me adding that, but that's been my point for years. It's this sola fide, very Protestant view of your beliefs mattering more than what you can actually affect and what communities you can build out of that, which has really become the whole virtue and vice signaling apparatus of social media. It's why, in many ways, political ideologies got a tendency to be weirder because people have to differentiate themselves from one another for more attention on these platforms, but also have a tendency to be useless because they don't go off the platforms in any significant way and are really being controlled by marketing algorithms. Oh my God, can't you see that? Okay. So yeah, I think Haider was onto something because all these things have gotten worse since he wrote this essay. Despite my complaints about his framing and his somewhat hyper abstract and kind of obtuse writing style and not delimiting his stuff clearly, we can see here that he has a solid point. So what is left when the communist hypothesis is not sustained, aka when we don't believe that communism is really possible, even though we use the word all the time? What's called the remaining available position adjustment. It can mean modification, adjusting things within the parameters of the existing situation. It also means adjusting oneself to the world that exists. In organizations, proceduralism is the primary form of adjustment. Thank you, Robert's Rules of Order. Since democracy is the dominant opinion, proceduralism means a formalistic commitment to democracy, which does not recognize self-organization as a meaningful principle. AKA, we follow the institutions that already exist and thus end up defending them as part of the status quo, even though we're claiming we want to overthrow them. That is something that I've seen for a while. I think that's what Haider's getting at here. Contemporary organizations are independent of any party state, and state power is not at stake. Yeah, not at all. You're not even talking about power within factions of the party, really. What remains at stake is the consistency of the organization's internal bureaucracy, which controls the flow of communication, the disbursement of funds, and the varying degrees dictates decisions determined by representatives who function as factional interests over overall political positions. And particularly as things like funding for the DSA has gotten more fraught, as they weren't planning for the future when they were expanding, and then were not dealing with the fact they were contracting when they were having their congresses, you can see how this becomes more and more important. In a small-scale iteration of the form of parliamentarianism, punitively democratic decision-making is the domain of interest group brokerage, meaning the NGOs still dominate and people can come in and use those institutions who already have outside power, such as people who work in labor bureaucracies. Particularly as the labor union membership becomes more and more red, but its labor bureaucracies are basically people training to be Democratic Party operatives. What are you going to do? Why are we left only with adjustment with the communist hypothesis seemingly skewed from the outset? I wish we didn't use this weird Badouian framework here, but nonetheless, this was the current of the academic Marxists of the times. I give 3 reasons. And finally, we got hard stuff here. Sader's good when he gets away from his abstract stuff and actually gets into his specific complaints. I give Haider that. I like that about his identity politics books too. When he was talking about it in abstract, I was like, he was often framing it in terms of Foucault and Badiou and stuff. It wasn't really relatable and often was used by identity politicians themselves to come up with their own theory. But when he gave you concrete examples, he often made sense. So let's go here. We do not have the transmission of the hypothesis, aka people don't really know what communism is. In the history of the Communist Party in the 1930s Alabama, which was at a point of nearly all-black clandestine armed cell, that's what it was in Alabama, Robin G.G. Kelly tells of an older comrade who was heard telling young recruits, "There ain't one of us here who is born a communist. We learned it, and it ain't easy to learn." Despite great variance in formal education, communists established forms of transmission. The party formed study groups that read works in pamphlet form, ranging from James Allen's Negro Liberation and Lenin's What Is to Be Done to Marx and Engels' Communist Manifesto. By the mid-1934, the Bessemer section of the party designated the 1/2 hour of each meeting for study, 15 minutes of reading aloud and 15 minutes devoted to discussion. Because a lot of the people weren't literate, they would read these complicated works aloud and then would walk through what the meaning was and come to joint understanding. It's kind of like what I'm doing right now, except in person with social commitments and responsibilities. You know, how you build political stuff. If socialists and communists do not go beyond identitarian labels, it is in no smart part due to the absence of transmission in the form in which political education is submitted to the specifics of a political practice, aka we have a party or at least an organization with specific politics and specific goals to which the theory is actually useful, as opposed to theory as something that we studied in college and then applied everywhere willy-nilly. We do not produce egalitarian forms. Egalitarian forms are rare and arise from experiments. The bureaucratic conception of organization resists experiments. As Rosa Luxemburg said in her analysis of the mass strike, the rigid mechanical bureaucratic conception cannot conceive of the struggle save as the product of the organization of a certain stage of strength. On the contrary, the living dialectical explanation makes the organization arise as a product of struggle, aka it happens from reasons that are often beyond your control. When the organizational form is mechanically imposed accordance to the existence of the models determined by the bureaucratic nostalgia, you hold on to whatever weird voting structure was enabled by parties in 1927 or 1921 or 1914 or whatever. It forecloses the possibility of a collective form of action which represents everyone's equal capacity for thought, aka you can't really adjust to things on the ground because you're holding on to things dogmatically because, well, that's what you did. We do not conceive of other worlds. To use the formulation of Sun Ra, that's the wacky jazz, space jazz musician from the 60s and 70s. I love Sun Ra, but I don't know that most people know him today. There are other worlds that they have not told you of. These are worlds in which the subjective orientation is possible. That's what Graeber's book is about, although he only focused on the voluntaristic subjective orientation for reasons that we can get into, in which it is possible to make decision on an event which brings about something new. Oh, eventual politics. What has Heidegger wrought? All right. This is precisely what is impossible in the world of capitalism and parliamentarianism, which has come to limit our existence. AKA, that you can't imagine another world at all. The contemporary left is mired in the circular and disempowering disputes on whose material implications are ambiguous, which only seems to amplify the vitriol which accompanies them. Yeah, people get more vitriolic the less power they have. You ever hang out with poets? I'm one of them. I have. Oh my God. Is this true? All right. What is obscured is by the effective intensity of these disputes is that in the absence of a guiding political orientation, they represent little more than forms of adjustment within the existing world, aka our identities within the existing world even, and therefore an investment in what is. They back up the status quo, motherfuckers. Sorry, your political rebellion on Twitter helps Twitter make money, or X, or whatever you want to call it, or Bluesky if you're on that. It is impossible to generally act within the condition of depoliticization. So let's affirm the absolute necessity of reviving and transmitting the hypothesis that this world is not necessary, aka it can change. I don't know why you write it this way. Under the guidance of this hypothesis, we may begin to determine what new modes of politics are possible. I do not like Asad Haider's abstract writing style. I do not love his dependence on phraseology from Badiou that most people don't know. But I do think the four conditions that he talks about that leads to depoliticization are active today and in a more acute way than they were in 2019. What are you going to do about it? Particularly when depoliticization takes the form of pseudo politics, a politics which is not one. It's basically a cargo cult that's keeping you in a holding station in the status quo and posting about it and giving streamers money while not doing shit. I say as a streamer. But anyway, actually, I hate streaming, but I'm a video pontificator. Don't like punditry either, but hell, what are we going to do here? I do think there is a unclear academicization in this writing style that also makes it a little bit opaque. So I would focus on the three examples and the four conditions that he's talking about. A lot of the other stuff is probably could have been cleared up by not writing in Badu/Altusarianese and delimiting your points properly, etc., etc. But that's just me. But we are at a time where I think we have seen a politics that is a depoliticization that is mostly about nostalgia or the pseudo, the enjoyment or negative enjoyment of shaming and policing and maintaining identities that don't have effective political communities to back up what they're saying and don't have a party or don't have institutions or any of that. What you declare yourself to be is only relevant to you. And on that, protect your peace, like and subscribe. Hit the bell if you want to learn more because this is an educational channel. I mean, we are infotainment here, we know that, but maybe we'll help you learn some things. Take care. Keep your peace and protect it.